Hi, hello, it's Rachel. So, I've been on a bit of an Asian drama kick since I watched The Untamed at the end of 2024. And I've been watching a lot of C dramas, a lot of wuxias, but also a handful of J dramas, K dramas, and Thai dramas. One show that I had vaguely heard about years ago and was becoming very eager to check out was Goblin starring Gong Yu. So, I finally watched it in early December and where do I begin? So, for anyone who hasn't watched the show, I will be discussing spoilers for this decade old K drama. It's really not worth watching, in my opinion, but if you are determined to do so and you don't want it spoiled, I guess I will catch you in a different video. For anyone else who hasn't seen the show but doesn't mind spoilers, let me give a brief, simplified description. Goblin follows Goblin, a man who has been alive for more than 900 years due to being cursed with immortality, and he cannot die until he meets a woman who is his goblin bride. Now, Goblin is not supposed to intervene in human affairs, and he rarely does. I mean, shortly after he's been cursed with immortality, there's a scene where a bunch of men dangle a child off the side of a ship, and Goblin warns them to put the kid down safely, but he just lets them throw the kid overboard before he kills all of them. And the kid drowns. The kid dies and drowns. Like, it's so fucked up and insane to me that I'm supposed to, like, view Goblin as this moral character after that. I think you should have gotten the child out of harm's way, and then you could have gone on your murder rampage since, they were already willing to murder a child. Why did anyone in the writer's room think that this was a good idea for constructing a lead character that is supposed to be likable? I don't know. Anyway, as I was saying before I got distracted by that tangent, Goblin is not supposed to intervene in human affairs. But one day, a pregnant woman is left for dead after being hit by a car, and Goblin hears her praying. And upon learning about her pregnancy, he decides to save her. It's giving a pro life vibe for him to save an unborn baby when he let a living, breathing child drown, but okay, I guess. Reaper, a Grim Reaper, obviously, was supposed to guide this woman and the unborn baby into the afterlife, but when he arrives at the site of the crash, they are no longer there due to Goblin saving them. The unborn baby that Goblin saved is born and is a girl who is given the name Ji Yoon-tak. As a result of Goblin's meddling, Yoon-tak can see ghosts and communicate with them, and she is his Goblin bride. Goblin and Yoon-tak meet again on her 19th birthday, and well, given she's the Goblin bride, I assume you know where this is going. So, yes, you heard that right. The plot of Goblin centers around a romance between an immortal being that is nearly a millennium old and a 19-year-old. And I'm just supposed to be okay with this? And before anyone argues that this happens in other media on a regular basis, I know this kind of dynamic happens elsewhere. I mean, American vampire media from the past 2 or 3 decades loves a mortal teenager and centuries old vampire romance. Although, from a visual perspective, I guess that doesn't tend to be as jarring, since the vampires are usually frozen in their teenage years and attend high school with normal teenagers. Still very creepy and disgusting that the human teenager centuries old vampire romance has become so popular and normalized in recent years. But visually, it does look like two teenagers dating, which makes it easier to trick the viewer into forgetting about the age gap. I cannot say the same for Goblin and Yoon-tak. Goblin is very clearly well into adulthood. Gong Yu was in his 30s when this was filmed. He could not pass for being a teenager or, just leaving his teenage years, while Yoon-tak very much looks and behaves like a teenager. Look at them visually. Does this not scream child and parental figure to anyone else? It's so creepy. And to make matters worse, The show is very aware of her being on the cusp of adulthood, as Goblin and Reaper repeatedly refer to Yoontak as a child. Like, what kind of insanity to have a grown adult referring to their love interest as a child? No one in the writer's room or on set thought that that was creepy as hell? No one? And then, as if that doesn't draw enough attention to the age gap, Yoontak uses the term of address "ajusi" almost every time she talks to Goblin. So that's extremely troubling, just on its own. Yoontak is also extremely isolated. Since her mom's death when she was 9, she has been living with her aunt and cousins who are abusive towards her. Her teacher is extremely unsupportive about her struggles and treats her terribly, and she is bullied by her peers because they find her off-putting. So, no friends, no adults she can trust. That's a very worrying ingredient when it comes to the potential for being groomed. Anyway, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Let me roll it back. Goblin and Yoontak meet when she blows out her birthday candles. There's this whole thing of her summoning him by blowing out fire. It's not that important, other than being a narrative device to force them to interact for the first few episodes, and later becoming a way for her to summon him when she's in danger. Anyway, her birthday wishes are 1, to get a job, 2, to get away from her abusive family, and 3, to get her first boyfriend. Goblin helps fulfill the first 2 wishes, and she becomes fixated on the third wish. Because of course she does. Most teenagers obsess over their dating lives, especially if they have never dated anyone, and obviously she hasn't when she's a social pariah at school. So, Yoontak becomes infatuated with Goblin pretty much immediately after meeting him.
잠깐만요. 저 얘기 아직 안 끝난.
너 지금 정문으로 들어온 거야? 나 따라서? 어떻게 들어왔어?
손잡이를 잡는다. 민다. 아저씨를 따라. 근데 여기 왜 이래요?
야, 그래서 내가 지금 묻잖아. 정문 어떻게 통과한 거야 대체?
파주인가? 영어 마을 거기? 근데 거기라도 이상하지? 여기 대체 어떻게 된 거예요? 여기 어디예요 대체?
캐나다.
캐나다요? 캐나다면 그 단풍국? 아 모르나 거기? 여기 진짜 외국이에요? 대박! 아저씨 이런 능력도 있었어요?
너도 있네. 너 진짜 뭐지?
여기가 진짜 캐나다고 아저씨 능력이 이 정도면 저 결심했어요.
뭘?
맘 먹었어요 제가.
뭘?
저 시집 갈게요 아저씨한테. 난 암만 생각해도 아저씨가 도깨비 맞는 것 같거든요. 사랑해요.
She's only interacted with him for like 15 minutes at this point, and she's saying she'll marry him? Girl, what? Like, make it more clear how little life experience she's had and that she's still developing and experiencing intense emotions because she is literally still a teenager. God, this relationship makes me so nauseated. And then to further emphasize this, When she feels rejected by Goblin and reconnects with a childhood friend, she immediately shifts all those romantic feelings she's been projecting onto Goblin to this boy. Like, it's really giving the vibe of develop feelings for the first guy who gives you attention. And not even good attention, as I'll discuss in a moment. Again, it's very, very painfully clear that she is a teenager. Very, very painfully clear how lonely she is and how rejected she feels. So, as I just kind of implied, it has to be said that Goblin treats Yoontak like shit for the first third of the show. At first, he doesn't believe she is the Goblin Bride and is very rude towards her because he's trying to get her to leave him alone, which, I mean, fine, fair enough, I guess. The narrative is supposed to be that he's an asshole who is trying to repress his emotions, and then his walls are gradually torn down as he spends time with Yoontak. But as of right now, it's a teenage girl who won't leave him alone and keeps summoning him for no reason, and then claiming that she isn't summoning him. I'm sure I would also get a bit fed up if I were in that situation. But after she's summoned him a handful of times, there's this whole sequence that demonstrates how he secretly really likes getting attention from her. It's fucking weird. I hate the facade he has of being mean to her and then acting like a nervous teenager with a crush when she's not around. Like, you're over 900 years old. Why are you behaving so immaturely and manipulatively? When he realizes she is actually the Goblin Bride, he adopts this frosty, detached attitude because he's trying to keep emotional distance, and he tries to avoid her. But then there are also times when he's very controlling, which she enjoys because we live in hell, and she likes that he's quote-unquote concerned about her well-being. She actually moves in with him not too long after she proves she is the Goblin Bride because her aunt nearly gets her killed, and it's just genuinely unsafe for her to continue staying in that house, and Yoontak has nowhere else to go. So Goblin decides trying to avoid her is futile, and he agrees to let her live in his house. Anyway, as I've already mentioned, she starts crushing on a boy that she has history with, and when that happens, Goblin, the man who is almost 1,000 years old, in case you forgot, has a fucking tantrum over it, and is mad that she's not giving him attention anymore.
태희, 뭐?
지은탑? 와, 이게 얼마만이야. 못 알아볼 뻔했다.
그쵸, 제가 많이 변했죠. 그동안 고생을 되게 많이 해가지고.
더 예뻐져서 키도 많이 크고.
오빠 이 학교 다녀요? 저 오늘 여기 논술 봤는데.
일어나서 뭐라도 좀 먹어.
머리를 헝클더라. 손목을 부러뜨릴 뻔.
누가?
몸을 베베 꼬들어. 꽈배기인 줄.
그니까 누가?
그냥 피아노 치게 뒀어야 했는데. 그랬어야 둘이 안 만나는 건데.
아이스크림 드시게요?
싫은데? 혼자 먹을 건데 이거 돈 내가 낸 건데?
저 아무 말도 안 했는데요.
비가 와서 아이스크림이 너무 먹고 싶어. 비가 와서.
아무 말도 안 했다니까요.
그러니까 왜 아무 말도 안 하고 그걸 들고 있어? 좋은 말로 할 때 그 빙글빙글한 거 얌전히 내려놔.
이 블루투스 스피커요.
손 떼.
Because he's an immature, passive-aggressive baby, he forces her to do all of the household chores manually, under the implied threat she will become homeless if she doesn't, by the way. And it's just like, wow, this man is treating her exactly like her abusive aunt did. The same aunt that pushed her into this situation in the first place. But now I'm supposed to find it funny and cute because he's jealous that she has feelings for someone who is actually age appropriate for her to date? These writers can go to hell. Oh, by the way, he also threatens that boy to leave you and talk alone.
태희가 누구야? 나와.
야 최태희, 누가 너 찾아?
제가 최태인데 누구세요?
너 이렇게 생길 거였었어?
네?
여기서 제일 잘생겼잖아.
그거야 그렇죠. 근데요, 아저씨 나 본 적 있죠?
지금 보잖아 지금.
아니요, 나 봐봐요. 저 진짜 어디서 본 적 없어요? 나 요만할 때?
그렇게 된 연유로 그 아이가 날 알아봤어.
어쩌라고?
너 말 곧다이로밖에 못해? 그딴 대답 듣자고 내가 이 상스러운 걸 같이 다듬고 있는 줄 알아? 네가 기억을 안 지우면 늙지 않는 남자에 대한 흉흉한 소문이 돌 테고 난 이곳을 떠나야 된다고. 오순도순 살자며.
그런 적 없다며.
너 인생 그렇게 사는 거 아니다. 서로 돕고 살고.
이 신원 보증하실 거예요? 신원 보증인 있어야지 나갑니다.
오해가 있으신 모양인데 전 전화를 받고 오긴 했지만 이자를 모릅니다. 도움이라는 걸 받아본 적이 없어서. 글쎄요, 어떻게 도와야 할지.
연락 받고 오신 거 아니에요?
아는 걸로 하자. 나도 도울게. 태희 오빠 기억 방면으로.
방금 잘 아는 자입니다. 무전취식이라.
아니, 누가 지도새도 모르게 다시 갖다 놨다니까? 아니, 이 큰 걸 들여놓는데 어떻게 동네 사람 한 명이 못 봐? 귀신이 고칼 노릇이야, 고칼 노릇.
So, that's totally cool and normal behavior from a nearly 1,000-year-old man. So, basically, Yoon Tak, a lonely 19-year-old who literally has no safe person in her life, is myopically focused on getting a boyfriend, and Goblin is a man who is frequently around her, so she just starts fawning over him even though he frequently ignores her, and then when he's actually acknowledging her existence, he's constantly berating her, and just generally being a gigantic asshole to her. Boom! Good romance. My thoughts are kind of all over the place, so I'm just going to chronologically go through a few other scenes that I found really concerning regarding their relationship because I cannot discuss every disturbing thing that happens between them. We will be here for an entire year if I do that. So, to get a bit more into the specifics of Goblin's curse, there's this phantom sword in his chest that only the Goblin Bride can see and remove. And once it's removed, he will die basically immediately. In one of his moments of being somewhat nice to Yoon Tak, he tells her that removing the sword will make him handsome, because he has been wanting to die for centuries and he's trying to convince her to pull the sword out. Obviously, while she is unaware of what will actually happen, she doesn't manage to do so, even though there are a few attempts. When she finally learns the truth that removing the sword will kill him, Yoon Tak literally runs away. She's known this man for a handful of months, and she's so distraught about the idea of him dying that she runs away to, like, a fucking ski resort in another town. What? And of course, because the show can't allow for her to escape this creepy man, when Yoon Tak learned the truth about the sword, Goblin learns that if he does not let Yoon Tak remove the sword, then she will die. Because she was never meant to come into existence, her sole purpose is to end his life, and now that they have met, the longer she pushes off ending Goblin's life, she will continue to have close brushes with death until she does actually die. So Goblin is anxious to track her down and keep her safe, and this is their conversation when he finds her.
집에 가자. 너 혼자 이러고 있으면 안 돼.
나 집 없어요. 내가 집이라고 생각했던 곳은 전부 다 내 집이 아니었어요. 그저 가까이 둔 거죠. 누군간 보험금 때문에. 누군간 죽고 싶어서. 이제 다 아는데 내가? 도깨비의 불멸을 끝낼 소멸의 도구라던데 내가?
말할 기회를 놓쳤고 기회를 놓쳐서 좋았고 가능하면 죽는 그 순간까지 모든 기회를 놓칠 참이었어. 근데 그러면 안 되는 거였어. 이 검에 묻힌 수천의 피를, 그 한 생명의 무게를 내가 판단하면 안 되는 거였어. 그러니까 이건 빼. 부탁이야.
아니요. 싫어요. 죽어도 싫어요. 그러니까 나 찾지 마요. 나 찾지 말고 각자 모르는 사람처럼 지내요, 우리. 나한테서 멀리 가서 그냥 오래오래 사시라고요, 김신 씨는. 알겠어요?
Girl, what? Yoontak has barely experienced life and she would rather die than let a man who's been alive for almost 1,000 years die? What the fuck is going on? Again, I know that she's lonely and I guess suicidal ideation makes sense when she's so isolated, but like she's specifically wanting to die because she's so unwilling to let him die. It's not about enduring abuse from what's left of her family. It's not about being a social pariah because she can see ghosts. It's about this one specific suicidal man that she's only known for a handful of months, who has been alive for almost 50 times longer than she has. And she cannot bear the idea of losing him. What? And to make this even more bonkers, insane, crazy, once Goblin finally tells her about the fact that death is quite literally chasing her, she doubles down on this mentality of I'd rather die than live without you.
아저씨, 그냥 내가 죽을래요. 아저씨는 계속 살 테니까 내가 환생해서 아저씨 만나러 올게요. 여기 꼭 있어요. 내가 찾아올게요. 약속할게요.
그럴까?
아저씨, 그냥 검 뽑읍시다. 나 죽으면 아저씨 영원히 혼자 살아야 하잖아요. 신부가 안 나타날 수도 있잖아요. 그냥 내가 검 뽑아줄게요. 그게 좋겠죠.
그럴까?
아저씨, 그냥 우리 같이 죽어요. 그게 좋겠어요. 한날 한시에. 누구 하나 혼자 남지 않게, 누구 하나 맘 아프지 않게.
진탁, 나 봐. 너 안 죽어. 안 죽게 할 거야. 내가 막을 거야. 내가 다 막을 거야.
Like, I remember being a teenager and remembering feeling like rejection from a crush was the end of the world. But even with that level of devastation, having a mentality of I would trade my life for him because I just can't bear the idea of him dying? Baby girl, you are only 19. There is so much life for you to still experience. This man has experienced things you cannot even fathom. And he literally wants to die. Like, I understand the idea of I don't want to be the one to end another person's life because that is such a fucked up burden to place on someone. But the idea of I can't bear to lose him? Hello? I'm losing my fucking mind. And okay, literally, why does Goblin develop feelings for her other than the narrative requiring it? Like I said, Yoontak is a teenager and she behaves like one. She's impulsive and obstinate and prone to emotional outbursts. Her initial infatuation towards him feels less like romance and more like her desperately clinging to the first adult who does one nice thing for her. Because if you recall, she starts throwing around the word love when she accidentally follows him through that door to Canada, and that impromptu trip is when she starts obsessing about him. And honestly, it never really feels like she grows out of that infatuation stage, or at least not until after the time jump, which I will get into in a moment. His feelings for her really do seem to stem from her optimism and kindness, and it's like, you can find that in so many other people, my guy. Also, the narrative of him changing his perspective on life doesn't inherently have to be due to a romance. She could completely change his perspective via them becoming friends, or him becoming a parental figure to her, and honestly, either of those probably would have been cute. Found family stories and intergenerational friendships are typically both very good dynamics, and I honestly think his initial bad treatment towards her would be easier to swallow as well if it was some sort of platonic dynamic instead of a romantic one. Okay, last thing I want to discuss before I talk about the events after the time jump. As I've already said, Goblin and Yoontak meet on her 19th birthday, so she becomes of legal drinking age in episode 10. And upon seeing the clock strike midnight on New Year's, she begs Goblin to buy her alcohol. So, yet another reminder of the age gap, as if there are a million other things reminding us of that already. And their outing that's a result of this request leads to their first mutual kiss, which I'm struggling to verbalize why that's so upsetting, but I'm not the only one who finds that extremely weird, right? Like, the show wants us to find this cute and romantic that he's helping her experience this for the first time, but watching this interaction, all I can think about is how young and inexperienced she is. Let me just play the scene, because oh my god, it is just so uncomfortable and cursed.
아저씨.
들어와. 무슨 일이야? 자고 있었는데.
그러고요?
나 원래 이러고 자. 왜?
아, 알았고요. 아저씨, 잘 들어봐요.
뭘?
아저씨, 12시 뜰 1월 1일 새! 저 방금 어른 됐어요!
Okay, so first off, Yoontak quite literally says, I just became an adult. The writers have done it before, but yet again, they are directly admitting, via their female lead's own words, that they have been pushing a romance between a nearly 1,000-year-old man and someone who was not yet an adult. Sit with that for a few minutes and tell me it doesn't make you want to throw up.
그래서 뭐? 어쩌라고? 옷은 왜 챙겨 입었어?
선약 있어서요. 나가려고요. 저 이제 어른이니까.
너? 와, 이 오밤중에 무슨 선약이야? 너 대체 정신...
아저씨랑 선약인데요?
그래서 옷 딱 입고 와. 아까부터 내가,
바보, 꼭 말로 해야 하나?
앞으로는 꼭 좀 하자. 사람 피 말리지 말고. 나가자고? 뭐 하고 싶은데?
해줄 거예요?
뭐가 됐든 네가 하라고 하면 그것까지 하고.
아저씨, 술이요. 술 사주세요. 포장마차 소주 닭똥집 낭만 카드. 왜요? 그럼 가보십시다. 낭만 속으로.
God, I just hate everything about their dynamic. I really do. We have his feigning obliviousness and disinterest as if he wasn't just lurking outside her door 30 seconds ago, so, like, that's extremely manipulative. But then when she's talking about how she wants to go out and he assumes that means she has plans with other people, suddenly he's about to forbid her from going out. And then, of course, when she says she wants to go out with him, he's stumbling over himself to leave the house with her. God, it's so gross. It's so nasty.
자, 처음부터 다시 낭만 시작해 보십시다.
아직도 낭만적이야?
아까보다 더요. 흐릿한 불빛, 소박한 안주, 쓴 소주, 비정한 정서, 도처의 낭만이 가득. 딱 하나만 더 있으면 완벽한데.
뭐?
첫 키스요.
너?
그때 그건 뽀뽀니까 움직이기 없기. 주사해.
너
내가 도깨비 신문 거 잊었어요? 안 걸린다고 난. 절대 못 피한다는 뜻이죠.
안 피한 건데? 한 번 피하는 것도 어려웠어.
하늘 아래 너와 있다면 숨 쉬는 것만으로도 좋아.
And then, when they're out, this is her first time having alcohol and she gets incredibly drunk because, of course she does. When it's your first time drinking, you're going to have a very low alcohol tolerance. And now that she's super drunk, she's determined to kiss him. And, like, the way she's going about it also highlights how young she is. Like, oh my god, every time you think it can't get more cursed. And then the writers have the fucking gall to have him be shy and trying to avoid it, as if this isn't clearly what he wants, because otherwise he would have shut all this down so long ago. Also, why the fuck would he freeze time if it wasn't because he's rightfully concerned about what other people would think if they saw them kiss? Like, he is very fucking aware of how creepy this dynamic is, but the show is trying to gaslight me into thinking this is romantic because Yoontak thinks it is, since she has no healthy relationships in her life to compare this relationship to. Which brings me to another thing that I want to complain about. Every time a piece of media decides to romanticize a predatory relationship, they always present the younger person as pursuing the older person, and it's just this narrative of, oh, how could they possibly resist? I mean, as someone who just recently turned 30, for me, when I learn someone is under 25, that immediately kills my interest on a romantic front. And if this situation is quote-unquote tempting to a person, then that means learning someone is still a teenager or just barely into adulthood isn't a deal breaker to them. Like, no one stumbles into a serious romantic relationship with someone barely into adulthood. You have to consciously decide to pursue that. If you recognize that this individual is still figuring out who they are and their opinions, and that their way of viewing the world is still very malleable, and you find the idea of a romantic relationship with them off-putting, there is nothing that that person could do that will suddenly make you interested. It's just insane, because while the whole idea of your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until 25 is bullshit, there's no definitive cutoff point, and there are multiple parts of the brain that are related to decision making. As someone who has experienced life in my early 20s and my late 20s, I can tell you firsthand that the way you interact with the world in your late 20s is wildly different. And, like, come on, when it comes to age gap dynamics, when it's supposed to be viewed romantically, media almost always has the young person pursuing the older person, because if it's the older person pursuing the younger one, it would rightfully be viewed as grooming. This is how media obfuscates the power imbalance. And the power imbalance is so fucking scary huge in this show. Goblin has had nearly 1,000 years to gain his wealth. Again, he has experienced so much that Yutak cannot possibly fathom. Meanwhile, I know I've already said this, but a little reminder, she's a broke 19-year-old who's homeless, if she doesn't live with Goblin, with no friends, and no adults to support her other than Sunny and Goblin's friends. Let's skip to the last few episodes because there's a few things I want to talk about in regard to the 10-year time jump. So I don't want to get too deep into the plot because who cares? But before the time jump, there's this ominous, really powerful ghost who's trying to kill Yuntak, and to defeat this ghost, Goblin has to use the sword, meaning that Yuntak has to pull the sword out. So if you will recall, Goblin will die once she pulls the sword out. From the way this is discussed, it sounds like he will cease existing and never reincarnate once he dies. However, once the sword is pulled out, the powerful ghost is vanquished. He vanishes before appearing in a snowy void. So the show building up that he's gone forever once the sword is pulled out was bullshit, because here he is, still alive. It's explained as him being tethered to Yuntak because he signed a contract that she wrote up. So, whatever. I give up on trying to follow the logic of this show. And of course he's still alive, so one day Yuntak can unintentionally summon him by blowing out candles, and he suddenly appears in front of her. I don't know how he managed to leave the snowy void. Again, I give up on trying to follow the logic. There's some meaningless drama of her having amnesia, but that only lasts for one episode. And once she remembers him, they immediately resume their relationship. And as soon as they do, they start planning their wedding and all the happily ever after things you would expect. Whatever. But then, in the final episode, Yuntak sacrifices her life and gets into a car accident to save a bunch of young school children. And, I get it. I get that she was only born because of Goblin's meddling and she wasn't supposed to exist. I get the theme of fate that runs through the show. But for the show to beat you over the head with Goblin has to die for Yuntak to live, and being repeatedly told that everything is over for him forever once the sword is pulled out. But then the writers come up with a way to keep Goblin alive, and they kill Yuntak? When I tell you I rage cried for 30 minutes over this, and I'm saying this as someone who didn't even like Yuntak that much. I rage cried for 30 minutes, and I mildly liked her character. Anyway, Reaper is the person who guides Yuntak to the afterlife, so he makes sure Goblin can say goodbye to her before she leaves. And of course, in this goodbye, Yuntak has to comfort Goblin about the fact that she just died, because the story has prioritized him every fucking chance it gets. Of course, the story cares more about how sad it is for him that she died, and he lost her, more than the fact that she died in the first place.
내가 전에 한 말 기억해요? 남은 사람은 또 열심히 살아야 한다고. 가끔 울기는 되지만 또 많이 웃고 또 씩씩하게. 그게 받은 사랑에 대한 예의라고.
어떻게 이렇게... 너 나한테 어떻게 이렇게...
미안해요. 정말 미안해요. 나 좀 봐봐요. 얼굴 좀 보여줘요. 네? 아저씨, 내 소원 3개 중에 하나 안 들어줬잖아요. 지금 들어주면 안 돼요? 너무 오래 마음 아파하지 말고 또 만나러 올 거니까 나 잘 기다리고 비 너무 많이 오게 하지 말고 시민들 불편하니까.
하나인데 왜 3개 말해? 너 없이 나 어떻게 살아?
잠깐만 없을게요. 약속할게요.
God, we are still in the fucking trenches. And then to make things worse somehow, because the writers were too chicken shit to commit to a tragic ending, we see Goblin and a reincarnated Yoontak reunite, and she is a fucking teenager again. Goblin decides to go to this spot that allegedly has significance to him and Yoontak, even though they were only there twice. And on his way to this spot, he'd heard that students on a school trip are wandering around. And then, next thing you fucking know, Yoontak in a school uniform appears behind him. This is how the show ends, them gazing at each other with the implication they'll get their happy ending this time. Oh my god, I'm going to hurl. God, terrible, awful. I wish I could erase this show from my brain. I think the reason why it pained me so much and why I couldn't bring myself to stop watching, even when this repulsive romance is right at the heart of it, is because there were some aspects of the show that I did actually like. And there were 2 ways to fix the Goblin romance that would have made the show so much better. So the first fix, which is so easy, like annoyingly easy, is to make Yoontak an adult. Just write her as being in her mid-20s. Yes, this would mean reworking her character quite a bit, but it would barely change the plot. Because I think I get what the writers were going for with this romance. Goblin is so tired of his existence and ready to end his life until he meets Yoontak and starts falling for her. Since her purpose on a narrative level is to give him a new perspective and make him want to live again, she has to be the complete opposite to him. Bright and optimistic versus his pessimism, in need of protection when he's strong and powerful, innocent and naive when his immortality is punishment for his sins. But, Yoontak can be these things and still be an adult. She can be naive and cheerful and an idealist and in need of protection and be firmly into adulthood. But no, they made her a 19-year-old who is still in high school. She graduates from high school in episode 11 of 16, by the way, so the show is 70% over when she finally fucking graduates. And again, I don't fucking understand how Goblin develops feelings for her. The amount of people who had to sign off on this for it to even air in the first place, and no one thought this was weird as fuck. And I know I just spent probably more than 30 minutes complaining about this, but I genuinely don't have an issue with Yoontak crushing on Goblin, even though I don't love it. It's painful to watch. I have a problem with Goblin reciprocating when Yoontak is a disadvantaged teenager that probably would never have been interested in him if she'd had any supportive adults in her life after her mother died. The second option, which I think would be more narratively satisfying, would be for Goblin and Reaper to become romantically involved. So, I know I haven't really discussed Reaper because this video has basically just been me complaining about Goblin and Yoontak's romance, but just know Goblin, Reaper, and Yoontak are basically an inseparable trio. Before Yoontak moves in with Goblin, Reaper had been living with him for a few episodes. The two have a very antagonistic relationship at first. Lots of pranks and threatening each other, but they slowly develop a friendship. The hints of a friendship start at the end of episode 2 when Goblin somehow convinces Reaper to go with him to save Yoontak's life when she is nearly about to die in a car accident. The two quickly become quite protective of Yoontak, and in a superior version of the show, they would both be parental figures to her. To explain why a Goblin-Reaper romance would be narratively satisfying, let me dig a bit deeper into the plot. So, in Goblin's original life, he was a soldier for the king, Wang Yeo. But the king was manipulated by his advisor to view Goblin as a threat and had Goblin executed along with most of his family. As we learn in the last third of the show, although there had been hints pointing towards this reveal for a few episodes, Reaper is Wang Yeo. Now, Reaper is unaware of this until after Goblin confronts him about it because his memory has been wiped. But yes, Reaper is Goblin's sworn enemy, the man he spent centuries despising. Like, just think about how narratively satisfying it would be. The angst of Goblin realizing that he's fallen in love with and has started picturing a future with the same person who betrayed him and doomed him to this existence, but then choosing to forgive Reaper and still loving him. Like, I hate the trope of enemies to lovers 99% of the time, but this would have been so epic if the show had pursued this. And I think on some level, the writers are aware that Goblin and Reaper is the better romance, because the emotionally deep moments they have are just way more intimate than anything he shares with Yoon-tak. Like, let's compare some scenes.
넌 신을 본 적이 있어? 혹시 지금 신을 보고 있는 거야?
말 걸지 말랬지. 나 같은 말단이 신을 어떻게 봐.
난 본 적 있는데.
어떻게 생겼는데?
그냥 나비였어.
꼭 그런 식이지. 지나가는 나비 한 마리도 함부로 못하게.
얼굴이라도 보여주면 원망이라도 구체적으로 할 텐데.
그러게.
신이 정말 견딜 수 있는 만큼의 시련만 주는 거라면 날 너무 과대평가한 건 아닌가 싶다.
힘들어?
걱정 마. 안겨서 울진 않을 거야.
근데 무로 돌아간다는 건 뭐였어요?
너를 못 보는 거.
이유도 모르게 비만 오면 미친년 같았어요. 아프고 울고 혼자 중얼거리고 약 먹어도 안 듣고 받은 사랑에 대한 예의로 씩씩하게 잘 살았어야 했는데 미안해요.
이제부터 계속 행복하게 해줄게. 자각이 없는 것 같다는 말인데 왜 자꾸 만지는 것인지 몹시 곤란하군.
확인하려고 얼떨떨해서 꿈 아닌가 해서.
꿈 아니야.
이런 꿈 너무 많이 꿔봐서.
꿈 아니야.
계속 안 믿어져서 너무 놀래서 아직도 심장이 뛰어서.
내 누이도 김선이었어, 이름이. 그래서 좀 싱숭생숭했어, 밤새.
환생했는지 안 했는지도 모른다며.
다른 얼굴 태어났으면 알아볼 방도가 없지. 인간의 기륭화복이 보이는 게 전부라.
만약에 누이가 환생했고 마침내 만났어. 그럼 그 뒤엔 어떻게 돼? 어차피 네 누이는 전생에 대한 기억도 가지고 있지 않을 텐데.
그냥 뭐 이 생에선 평안한지 우병장수한지 사랑은 받고 있는지 그런 게 궁금한 거지 뭐. 이뻤는데 우리 못나니.
좀 더 해봐. 말 나온 김에.
뭘?
네 얘기. 어떻게 살았는지, 어떻게 죽었는지.
한 번 말했잖아. 장군이었다고. 고려의 무신이었어.
전쟁터에서 죽은 거야?
아니, 내가 지키던 주군의 칼날에. 어디서부터 어떻게 시작을 해야 할까? 나도 한 번도 얘기해 본 적 없는 얘기라 소금 좀.
어.
죄송한데요. 그러기엔 제 조사가 아직 안 끝나서요.
무슨 조사?
아저씨 이름 찾아봤어요. 인터넷으로. 생애 업적 뭐 그런 거 아무것도 없던데. 애초에 누가 다 지워버린 것처럼. 아저씨가 전에 나한테 그랬잖아요. 네가 나에게서 무언가를 발견한다면 넌 나를 아주 많이 원망하게 될 거라고. 무언가는 검이었고 저는 그걸 발견했고 아저씨 원망 안 하는데 원망할 거라고 한 거 보면 그건 뭔가 더 남아있다는 거고. 그래서요. 그 검 절대 안 그럴 거라고 믿었던 사람이 그랬다 그랬죠. 아저씨 혹시 나쁜 일에서 역사 속에서 기록이 삭제된 거예요? 나쁜 일에서 벌 받는 거면 검 뽑아주기 좀 그렇잖아요. 아저씨 혹시 뭐 영모 그런 거 했어요?
맞아, 네 말이. 살아남기 바쁜 생이었다. 역사에 기록되지 않은 시간들이었다. 안간힘을 썼으나 죽음조차 명예롭지 못했다. 이 검이 그 벌이다. 근데 그게 벌이라도 900년 받았으면 많이 받은 거 아닐까?
아니에요. 버릴 리 없어요. 신이 벌로 그런 능력을 줬을 리가 없어요. 아저씨가 진짜 나쁜 사람이었다면, 아저씨가 진짜 나쁜 사람이었다면 도깨비만 존재하게 했을 거예요. 도깨비 신부 만나게 해서 그 검을 뽑게 했을 리가 없어요.
내가 널 위해 이 상스러운 걸 만져봤는데 좀 먹는 게 어때? 사과가 토끼인데도?
써니 씨가 떠났어. 그 여인은 참 끝까지 항상 잘 가. 너 그렇게 되고 어찌할지 몰라. 내가 갖고 있었어. 진작에 돌려준다는 게 그만. 늦어서 미안.
처음부터 내 것은 아니었지. 너의 한이고 죄고 그리움이었지. 네가 갖는 게 맞는 것 같다.
그래도 될까?
응. 이거 먹으면. 그리고 고마워. 위패 모시는 그 절, 나 없는 9년 동안 네가 매년 촛불 밝혀줬다더라.
그들을 기를 자격이 있는진 모르겠지만 내 죄와 마주해 보려고.
누가 좀 얘기해줬으면 좋겠다, 우리한테. 그만 되었다. 그만하면 되었다. 하고.
Like, why is the emotional intimacy for the actual canon romance so shallow, but then Goblin's most emotionally intimate relationship is the one dynamic where the idea of romance is played as a joke? It just honestly makes me really sad how much better and more rewarding the show would have been if it had been willing to pursue the gay romance. One day we will escape heteronormativity. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this show. A little nervous to post this one because I know how beloved Goblin is, but I was going insane when I was watching the show because a decade is far too recent for this kind of nonsense. And then obviously most fans accept this painfully forced romance, or otherwise this show would not be so highly regarded, and I just couldn't not say anything about it. So yeah, this was my venting session that I needed to throw into the void before I just fucking lost my mind. I'd also love to hear other people's thoughts about the show, especially if you found the experience of watching it as excruciating as I did. If you liked the video, a like or a comment or a share would help me a lot. If you aren't subscribed and you would like to hear me talk more about the media I watch, that would also help too. You can also support me on Patreon, or if you don't want a monthly commitment, I also have a Ko-Fi for one-time payments. Hopefully I'll see you again soon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!